At exactly 1:07 a.m., someone pounded on my front door so hard that I thought the frame would splinter. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. I had been asleep for barely 3 hours after another long day at my little bakery. At 62 years old, I wasn't afraid of much anymore. But there was something about that desperate pounding that made my heart race before I even reached the hallway. When I pulled the door open, my entire world fell apart. My daughter Clara stumbled forward and collapsed into my arms. There was blood on the sleeve of her sweater. Her lower lip had been split open. One side of her face was already turning dark purple. She was shaking so violently that I could barely keep her standing. She grabbed my wrist with both hands, her fingers trembling as if she were holding on to the last safe place left in the world. She whispered through broken breaths. Please, don't make me go back. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I simply stared at my daughter. The little girl I had once carried to school on rainy mornings. The woman who had smiled so brightly on her wedding day. And wondered what kind of monster had reduced her to this. Then instinct finally took over. I pulled her inside, locked the front door, closed every curtain in the house, and wrapped her in the warm blanket that had belonged to her father. You're safe now, I whispered. She burst into tears. Not loud tears, the quiet kind. The kind that only come after someone has spent months pretending everything is fine. I dialed 911. While we waited for the ambulance, Clara refused to let go of my hand. Every few seconds she looked toward the windows, terrified someone was outside watching us. Who did this? I asked softly. She closed her eyes. You can tell me? They'll. No. Ooh. Her breathing became uneven. Julian, I felt my stomach tighten. My husband? She slowly nodded. But, she whispered, not just him. She swallowed hard before saying words that would haunt me forever. His mother. Another pause. And his brother. I looked into her frightened eyes and realized this wasn't one cruel husband. This was an entire family. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics rushed Clara inside while I followed close behind, refusing to leave her side. As we drove through the empty streets, I kept remembering the day she married Julian Thorne. Everyone had admired him. Successful, educated, handsome, respectful, or at least that's what everyone believed. His family owned construction companies, commercial properties, and luxury homes across 3 states. Every newspaper described them as one of the most respected families in the county. I remembered standing beside Clara during the reception, while Julian promised to love and protect her forever. He had looked directly into my eyes when he made those vows. I believed him. Now I hated myself for it. At the emergency room, doctors immediately wheeled Clara away for examinations. A young nurse asked me several questions while another carefully photographed every bruise on my daughter's body. The silence in the waiting room felt endless. Every second seemed longer than the last. Finally, a doctor stepped outside. His expression told me everything before he even opened his mouth. I'm sorry, he said quietly. My heart stopped. Your daughter has suffered multiple injuries. I couldn't breathe. He continued gently. There's something else. He hesitated, I knew. Before he said another word, somehow I already knew. She was pregnant. I stared at him. Unfortunately. He lowered his eyes. The baby didn't survive. The hallway disappeared around me. The sounds of nurses, the ringing phones. The footsteps. Everything faded into silence. My first grandchild was gone. Not because of illness. Not because of an accident. Because someone had hurt my daughter. I leaned against the wall, struggling to stay standing. Then I heard polished shoes approaching across the hospital floor. Julian. He walked toward us wearing an expensive charcoal coat without a wrinkle on it. His hair was perfect. His expression was calm. Too calm. Like a man arriving for a business meeting instead of an emergency. Behind him walked his mother, Eleanor Thorne. Elegant, perfect makeup, pearl necklace, designer handbag, not a single tear in her eyes. Julian immediately turned toward the nurses. My wife is very emotional, he said with a sympathetic smile. She slipped on the stairs at home. I looked at him in disbelief. He didn't even hesitate. Not 1 second. The lie came so naturally that I wondered how many times he had practiced it. The nurse glanced toward me but continued writing. Eleanor stepped forward, gently touching Julian's shoulder, as if comforting him. This pregnancy has been difficult, she sighed dramatically. Hormones can make young women unstable. Unstable, I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked directly toward Julian until we stood face to face. What happened to my daughter? His smile never changed. I'm just grateful she's alive. Answer my question. I already did. Before I could respond, Clara's weak voice echoed from inside the examination room. Mom. I hurried inside. She reached for my hand again. There were tears running down both cheeks. I'm sorry. I kissed her forehead. You have nothing to apologize for. I couldn't save the baby. My own tears finally came. You didn't fail anyone. I tried. I know. She looked over my shoulder toward the doorway. Her entire body became rigid. Julian had quietly entered the room, without asking permission, without speaking. He simply stared at Clara. Not with concern, with calculation, like he was measuring whether she would say something dangerous. Then he smiled. Sweetheart, he said softly, let's go home. Clara instantly pulled her hand away from him. It was just an accident? No, you need rest? She began shaking again. I said no. The fear in her voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. Not anger, not sadness. Pure terror. That single word told me more than any explanation ever could. She was afraid of her own husband. Julian looked at me. I think your daughter is confused. No, I answered calmly. I think she's finally telling the truth. For the first time that night, his confident smile faded, only for a second. But I noticed. Eleanor walked into the room before either of us spoke again. She looked directly at Clara. You've embarrassed this family enough. Then she turned toward me. Take her home for the night, Madeline. Her voice remained polite, cold, controlled. Teach her not to destroy good families over emotional outbursts. I stared at the woman standing in front of me. For years she had looked down on me because I owned a neighborhood bakery instead of a luxury estate. To her, I was simply the poor widow who sold birthday cakes and cinnamon rolls. Harmless, ordinary, forgettable. She had absolutely no idea who I used to be. Before opening my bakery, I had spent 22 years working as a forensic auditor for the state attorney's office. I had investigated financial crimes that destroyed million-dollar corporations. I had followed stolen money across dozens of shell companies. I had uncovered insurance fraud, political corruption, forged documents, and hidden bank accounts. My job had never been about numbers. It had always been about lies. Because every criminal makes one mistake, they become so confident that they stop hiding the truth. As I looked into Julian's eyes, I saw that same confidence. He believed money would protect him. He believed his family name would protect him. He believed no one would ever believe my daughter. Most of all, he believed no one would ever challenge him. He was wrong. Julian reached toward Clara again. Come home. Before his hand could touch her shoulder, I stepped between them. No, his expression hardened. Excuse me? You heard me. That's my wife. I held his gaze without blinking. You already touched my daughter once. The room became completely silent. Doctors stopped walking. Nurses stopped writing. Even Eleanor looked surprised. Then I spoke the words that would change every one of our lives. You hurt my daughter. I took one slow step closer. And now, another step. I'm going to touch everything you own. For the first time since entering the hospital, Julian Thorne looked afraid. The moment Julian and Eleanor finally left the hospital, I knew they weren't giving up. People like them never accepted defeat. They simply looked for another way to win. Clara stayed in the hospital overnight for observation. Between the injuries and the emotional trauma, the doctors insisted she wasn't safe to leave. I agreed without hesitation. The last place she needed to be was anywhere near the Thorne estate. I spent the night sitting beside her hospital bed. Neither of us slept much. Every time Clara drifted off, she woke a few minutes later, gasping for air, convinced someone was standing in the room. Each time, I reminded her where she was. You're safe. They can't come in here. I'm not leaving you. Around 6 the next morning, sunlight began filling the room. Clara stared quietly out the window before finally speaking. Mom. I'm listening. I should have left months ago. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You leave when you're ready, not when everyone else thinks you should. She shook her head. I kept believing he'd change. Her voice cracked. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward. He bought flowers. He promised it would never happen again. She laughed bitterly. Then it happened again. And again. I felt my chest tighten. Why didn't you tell me? She looked down. Because they made me believe it was my fault. Those words broke my heart. Abusers rarely begin with violence, they begin with control. Little by little, they isolate their victims until the victim starts doubting their own memories. Julian had done exactly that. He said I was too emotional. She stared at the blanket covering her legs. If dinner was late, fault. If he was angry after work, my fault. If his mother criticized me, my fault. If I cried, I was unstable. She closed her eyes. I actually started believing them. I wanted to tell her none of it was true. But she already knew. What she needed wasn't another speech. She needed proof that her life could still belong to her. After the doctors finished their morning examination, they discharged Clara into my care. Instead of driving straight home, I stopped at the local police department. Clara looked surprised. What are we doing? We're making sure there's an official record. Inside, an officer photographed every visible bruise again and took a detailed statement. Julian had underestimated one important fact. Evidence fades, bruises heal, memories become uncertain. But reports remain forever. When we finally reached my house, Clara immediately noticed something sitting on the front porch. A bouquet of white roses. No card, no signature, only flowers. She froze. They're from him. I carefully picked up the bouquet without touching the stems. Something felt wrong. Inside the flowers was a small envelope. I opened it. There was only one sentence. As families should stay together. No signature was necessary. I placed everything into a plastic evidence bag. They're watching us, Clara whispered. Maybe. Aren't you scared? I looked directly at her. I've spent half my life chasing people who believed money made them untouchable. I smiled faintly. They were always wrong. That afternoon, while Clara rested upstairs, I unlocked a steel cabinet hidden beneath the stairs. Inside sat an old laptop. It hadn't been turned on in years. Dust covered the lid. When the screen finally came to life, memories flooded back. Case files, financial records, investigation software, encrypted databases. The life I had left behind after Raymond died. I typed in a password I hadn't used in nearly 8 years. The desktop appeared exactly as I had left it. For the first time in years, I wasn't a baker. I was an investigator again. The first thing I requested was Clara's complete medical file. Every photograph, every X-ray, every laboratory report, every doctor's note. Nothing would be overlooked. Next, I contacted the emergency room nurse who had treated Clara. She agreed to preserve every photograph taken during admission. Chain of custody mattered. If this ever reached court, every piece of evidence needed to survive scrutiny. By evening, my dining room table had transformed into an investigation center. Folders covered every surface. Medical reports, phone records, printed text messages, insurance information, marriage records. Everything connected somehow. I was simply waiting for the pattern to appear. Around 8 that night, Clara slowly walked downstairs carrying a cup of tea. She looked exhausted. "Mom, sit." As she lowered herself into the chair across from me, I remembered something. I stopped writing. "What is it?" She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Eleanor made me drink herbal tea almost every evening."
Why?
She said it helped with pregnancy sickness. "Did it?" "No." "How did it make you feel?" "Dizzy." She stared into the cup. "Sometimes I'd sleep for 12 hours. My pen stopped moving. "Did your doctor prescribe it?" "No." "Did you ever read the ingredients?" She shook her head. "Julian always prepared it." A cold feeling settled over me. "What else?" She took a deep breath. 3 nights before I lost the baby." She struggled to continue. "I woke up because I heard voices downstairs. Ooh, Julian, and his mother." She swallowed hard. "I heard Eleanor say." Tears filled her eyes. "If the baby comes, everything changes." I leaned closer. "What did Julian say?" he said. Her voice became barely audible. "Don't worry. She won't carry it much longer." The room went completely silent. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Those weren't words spoken in anger. They sounded planned, calculated, deliberate. I reached across the table and held my daughter's shaking hands. "Clara." She looked at me. "Is there something about your father's estate that Julian wanted?" Her eyes widened. "You know?" "I don't know. I'm asking." She nodded slowly. "Dad created a family trust before he died. I remember. The lake property." I waited. "The trust says ownership can't pass outside our family." I felt something click into place. "But," she continued, "if I had a child, the child would inherit Dad's controlling interest. And if there was no child," she hesitated, "my husband would become temporary manager until another legal heir existed." Now the picture became much clearer. This wasn't simply domestic violence. This was greed. Julian hadn't married Clara because he loved her. He had married the future owner of millions of dollars in protected family property. If Clara became mentally unstable, if she lost the baby, if she became legally incapable of managing the trust, he would gain control. Not ownership, control. For someone like Julian, that was enough. He could drain the trust before anyone noticed. Sell assets, create debts, move money. Destroy everything Raymond had spent his lifetime building. I stood up immediately. "Where are you going?" Clara asked. "To check something." I hurried back to the old laptop and logged into the trustee archive Raymond had insisted we keep years earlier. Every request involving the family trust had been automatically copied to me. Most people never knew that. Apparently, neither had Julian. Within minutes, I found the first irregularity. A document requesting changes to trustee authority. Submitted under Clara's digital signature. She had never signed it. Then another. Property inquiries. Management requests. Financial disclosures. Forged, every single one. Someone had been pretending to be my daughter for months. I began printing page after page. The printer barely stopped. When the final sheet landed in the tray, I looked at the growing stack of evidence: medical abuse, forgery, financial fraud, conspiracy. This case had become far bigger than I had imagined. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. A familiar male voice filled the line. "This ends tonight. Julian. You've made a mistake." Madeline. "No, I've finally recognized yours." His tone turned colder. "You think you can protect her forever? I only need to protect her long enough." "For what?" "For the truth." He laughed. "You have no proof." I looked at the mountain of documents covering my dining table. "No," I replied calmly. "I have something much more dangerous." He remained silent. "I have time." I ended the call before he could answer. Then I picked up another phone. There was only one person I trusted with what came next: Detective Sarah Vance. Years earlier, we had worked together to expose a corruption network worth nearly $50 million. She answered on the second ring. "Madeline, it's been a long time. Too long. I need a favor." She immediately recognized something in my voice. "This isn't about cupcakes, is it?" "No. It's about attempted murder." Silence. Then she spoke with the same steady confidence I remembered from years ago. "Tell me everything." And for the next 2 hours, I did. Detective Sarah Vance arrived at my house just after sunrise. She hadn't changed much over the years. The same calm eyes, the same confident posture, the same habit of studying a room before speaking. She looked over the files spread across my dining room table and slowly nodded. "I knew if you ever called me again," she said, "it wouldn't be for something small." "It isn't." She spent nearly an hour reading every document I had printed: medical records, photographs, threatening text messages, copies of forged trust requests, phone logs, bank transfers. Every page added another piece to the puzzle. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "This isn't just domestic violence. I know. This is organized fraud. And I think it goes even deeper." Sarah looked at Clara. "Can you answer a few questions?" Clara nodded nervously. Sarah spoke gently. "When did Julian first begin controlling your finances?" "A few months after we married." "Did he ever ask you to sign documents without reading them?" "Almost every week." "Did you?" "I first. And later." I stopped. What happened? He became angry. Clara stared at the floor. "He told me a wife who didn't trust her husband didn't deserve to be married." Sarah wrote several notes. "Did he ever prevent you from seeing friends?" "Yes, family. Almost completely." "What about doctors?" "He insisted on coming to every appointment." Sarah quietly closed her notebook. "He was building control long before the violence started." I wasn't surprised. Predators rarely attack without preparation. They create dependence first, fear second, isolation third. Violence comes last. Sarah gathered every document into evidence folders. "I'll have these entered officially today." "What happens now?" Clara asked. "We let them think they're still winning." That afternoon, Sarah obtained emergency warrants for Julian's financial records while another team requested security footage from nearby businesses. By evening, the first breakthrough arrived. A pharmacist recognized Eleanor immediately. She had purchased several herbal supplements over the previous 4 months. Normally they weren't dangerous. But during pregnancy, they could significantly increase complications. Even worse, she hadn't purchased them for herself. She had specifically asked whether they could be hidden inside tea. Sarah looked at me. "That's enough for another warrant." But the surprises were only beginning. Early the next morning, one of Sarah's investigators called. "We found something on Julian's brother." Within an hour we were reviewing computer records recovered from his office, search history, deleted emails, private notes. One search caught everyone's attention, as how long before spouse can be declared mentally incompetent, and another, at emergency conservatorship after pregnancy breakdown, then another, transfer of trustee authority after mental incapacity. The room fell silent. They weren't reacting to Clara's emotional condition. They were planning it. Every search had been performed weeks before the assault. This had never been spontaneous. It had always been part of a larger plan. Sarah immediately contacted the district attorney. By noon, subpoenas had been approved for additional financial records. Meanwhile, I focused on something different: money. Money always leaves footprints. When I reviewed Julian's construction company accounts, I noticed unusually large transfers between several limited liability companies. The transactions made little sense. Money moved from one company to another, then disappeared. Classic layering. Exactly the kind of financial movement criminals use to hide stolen assets. I printed every transfer, every invoice, every corporate filing. Years of experience told me one thing: if I followed the money long enough, it would eventually lead to motive. Late that afternoon, Clara walked quietly into my office carrying an old photo album. I found these. Inside were photographs from her wedding. She smiled sadly. I remember believing I was the luckiest woman in the world. I sat beside her. You loved him. I loved the man he pretended to be. She turned another page. Every picture now felt different. Julian smiling. Eleanor hugging guests. His brother raising a champagne glass. Perfect family, perfect lies. Then Clara stopped on one photograph. Wait, she pointed toward the background. Standing near the reception hall entrance was a man wearing a dark suit. Neither of us recognized him. Who's that? I don't know. I looked closer. The man wasn't watching the bride. He wasn't watching the guests. He was watching Raymond's attorney, the trustee. Interesting. I scanned the photograph into my computer and enlarged it. The image became grainy but recognizable enough. Sarah immediately forwarded it through facial recognition. Several hours later, she called. Who is he? A private investigator. My eyebrows lifted. Hired by whom? Julian. When? 3 months before the wedding. I looked at Clara. He was investigating your father's trust before he married you. Clara covered her mouth. So, he already knew about the property. Everything suddenly made sense. Julian hadn't accidentally fallen in love with Clara. He had selected her, planned her, studied her. Every compliment, every romantic gesture, every proposal, every promise, it had all been part of a business strategy. For the first time since leaving the hospital, Clara became angry instead of afraid. I wasn't his wife. I gently squeezed her shoulder. No. I was an investment. That evening Sarah returned with more news. The district attorney agrees. Agrees with what? We're dealing with conspiracy. She placed another folder on my table. One more thing. Inside were copies of draft court documents, emergency guardianship papers, petitions declaring Clara mentally unstable, medical evaluations already prepared. None had been filed yet. The dates made my blood run cold. They were scheduled to be submitted the morning after Clara escaped. If she had returned home that night, those papers would already be in court. She could have been locked inside a psychiatric facility, while Julian took control of the trust. Clara began crying quietly. I was never going to have a chance. I looked directly into her eyes. You do now. Sarah folded her arms. We have enough evidence to arrest them. I shook my head. Not yet. She frowned. What are you thinking? They still believe Clara is frightened. They're right. No. I smiled slightly. They believe she's frightened enough to surrender. Sarah immediately understood. You want them to expose themselves. Exactly. The case becomes even stronger if they attempt coercion again. She considered it for a moment, then slowly smiled. I missed working with you. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. The next morning Clara's phone buzzed. A text from Julian. Come home tonight. Bring your mother if she insists. We'll settle this privately before lawyers destroy everything. Guess at a second message followed. I'll have the trust documents ready. That's exactly what we wanted. Sarah looked at me. This could be dangerous. It could also end everything. Clara stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then she looked at me. I'm scared. I know. But I'm not running anymore. I nodded proudly. Neither am I. Sarah arranged surveillance around the Thorne estate. Uniformed officers would remain out of sight. Detectives would monitor every entrance. Body cameras would record every conversation. Search warrants were already signed and waiting. All we needed now was one final mistake. At exactly 6:42 p.m., I picked up Clara's phone. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a moment. Then I typed the reply. I'll be there at 7. Bring every paper you want me to sign. Less than 10 seconds later, Julian answered. Good. I knew you'd finally make the right choice. And I smiled as I locked the phone. No, I whispered. You just made yours. At exactly 7 o'clock that evening, I turned onto the long private road leading to the Thorne estate. The mansion stood exactly as I remembered it. Massive stone walls, perfectly trimmed gardens, elegant lights glowing from every window. From the outside it looked like the home of a respectable family. I knew better now. Beautiful houses can hide ugly secrets. Clara sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken during the entire drive. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You don't have to prove you're brave tonight. She looked at me. I know. You already are? She managed a small smile. As we pulled into the circular driveway, Sarah Vance's unmarked SUV remained hidden half a mile away. Several detectives watched the property through long-range cameras. Uniformed officers waited nearby for one phone call. Everyone knew the plan. No one moved until we had enough evidence. A housekeeper opened the front door before we even knocked. Mia's. Thorne is expecting you. Of course she was. Everything had been carefully arranged. As we entered the grand living room, Julian stood beside the fireplace wearing another perfectly tailored suit. His expression was calm, confident. He honestly believed tonight would end with Clara returning home under his control. Eleanor sat gracefully on the sofa, sipping tea from delicate china. Julian's younger brother Marcus leaned against the bar with his arms folded. Their attorney sat nearby with a thick stack of legal documents. Another man, dressed in an expensive gray suit, quietly organized papers at the end of the table. I recognized him immediately. The psychiatrist whose name appeared on the guardianship petition. He had never met Clara, yet he was prepared to declare her mentally unstable. Every piece of the plan was already in place. Julian smiled as though welcoming old friends. There you are. His voice was warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know him. I've been worried. Clara remained silent. He walked toward her slowly. I know you've been under a lot of stress. She instinctively stepped backward, he noticed. So did everyone else. His smile tightened for only a second. Then he looked at me. Madeline, Julian, I'm glad you finally convinced Clara to come home. I didn't. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Then why are you here? To hear the truth. For the first time, the room became uncomfortable. Eleanor calmly placed her teacup onto the table. There is no need for unnecessary drama. She looked toward Clara with practiced disappointment. You've embarrassed this family long enough. Clara's breathing became heavier. I quietly placed my hand over hers. She looked at me. I nodded once. You are not alone. Julian walked to the conference table and opened a leather folder. I've prepared several documents. He pushed them toward Clara. If you sign these, everything can return to normal. I glanced down. Power of attorney, temporary financial authority, medical consent, emergency guardianship acknowledgement. Every document transferred another piece of Clara's freedom into Julian's hands. He thought we hadn't read them. He underestimated us again. Clara slowly looked up. I'm not signing anything. Julian forced another smile. You haven't even read them. I don't need to. They're for your protection. No. His patience began slipping. You aren't thinking clearly. My thinking has never been clearer. Marcus laughed quietly. I told you she was stubborn. Eleanor stood and walked toward Clara. My dear. Her voice became unusually soft. You've suffered a terrible emotional loss. She gently reached toward Clara's shoulder. You need people who can make decisions for you. The Clara stepped away before Eleanor could touch her. I don't need you. Eleanor's eyes briefly hardened. Then she smiled again. You'll thank us someday. I finally spoke. Everyone turned toward me. You wanted her declared incompetent. Silence. You forged trust requests. More silence. You prepared court papers before she ever left this house. The attorney suddenly looked uncomfortable. What is she talking about? He asked Julian. Julian ignored him. Instead, he stared directly at me. You've been digging. I spent 22 years investigating financial fraud. His expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. You should have stayed in your bakery. I opened my briefcase and removed several folders, medical reports, forged signatures, financial transfers, photographs, text messages. One by one, I laid them across the polished table. The room grew quieter with every page. The attorney picked up one document. Then another. His face lost color. What is this? I answered before Julian could. Evidence. The psychiatrist looked at the unsigned guardianship petition. I was told she had already undergone evaluation. No, Clara answered firmly. I've never met you. The man looked toward Julian. You told me. Julian interrupted him. We'll discuss that later. No, the psychiatrist replied, standing up. I think we discuss it now. The attorney closed his folder. You never mentioned forged trust documents. Julian's voice became sharp. Sit down. I don't think I will. The attorney placed every paper back onto the table. If these documents are authentic. They are. Then I cannot represent you. He gathered his briefcase. I'm leaving. Marcus stepped forward. You can't just walk out. The attorney looked him straight in the eye. I certainly can. And I suggest you find your own lawyer. He walked out without another word. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Julian's confidence began disappearing. Eleanor could see it too. She spoke before he lost control. This is nothing more than accusations. I smiled. No, I reached into my purse and removed one final envelope. Toxicology. The word alone changed everything. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her teacup. I continued. Independent laboratory testing found substances consistent with repeated exposure to herbal compounds capable of causing severe pregnancy complications. Nobody spoke. Then I looked directly at Eleanor. You prepared the tea. Her hand began shaking. I don't know what you're talking about. You bought the herbs? We have the pharmacy records. Julian suddenly slammed both hands onto the table. Nof? The entire room jumped. He pointed directly at Clara. Do you know what you've done? His calm mask finally shattered. You ruined everything. Clara stared at him. You killed our baby. His breathing became heavy. That baby. He stopped himself. Too late. Sarah had warned me this moment might come. Arrogant people always believe they can explain themselves. Instead, they confess. Julian shouted across the room. That baby would have destroyed everything. The words echoed through the mansion. No one moved. No one breathed. Even Julian seemed to realize what he had just admitted. Eleanor whispered desperately. Julian. But anger had taken complete control. You were never supposed to carry that child to term. He pointed at Clara again. You were supposed to cooperate. His voice became louder. We spent years building this plan. The room fell completely silent. Then, a calm voice came from the hallway. I think that's enough. Julian slowly turned. Detective Sarah Vance stepped into the living room. Behind her came 6 police officers wearing body cameras. Every single word, every confession, every threat, had just been recorded. No one in the room moved. The silence after Julian's confession felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. For years, he had hidden behind expensive suits, polished manners, and the reputation of the Thorne family. Now every carefully built lie had collapsed in less than a minute. Detective Sarah Vance stepped forward, holding up her badge. She said calmly, Don't move. His face turned pale. You've got this all wrong. Sarah didn't respond. 2 officers entered from the front hallway, while 4 more came through the patio doors. Within seconds, every exit from the mansion was blocked. Marcus took 1 step backward. An officer immediately stopped him. Stay where you are. Eleanor tried to recover her composure. This is ridiculous, she said. You can't invade our home because of a family disagreement. Sarah looked directly at her. This stopped being a family disagreement the moment your son admitted to a criminal conspiracy. Julian suddenly pointed at Clara. She's lying? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Interesting.